Okay, hi, I'm Matt Greenfield, and once upon a time, many moons ago, I directed the English ADR for Neon Genesis Evangelion.
And I'm Shamwell, and I am the mixing engineer for the restoration process.
There's a lot of stuff we had to do on this show. Now, we got from the Japanese, from Gainax and the various audio engineers over there, new stems for all the music and sound effects that are separated out so we could do a true 5.1 mix. But just because we have that doesn't simplify things, because everything moved around somewhat spatially, right?
Yes, and we were dealing with 8-year-old audio.
8-year-old audio that was backed up onto digital tape at this was at 44, right?
That's correct, it was recorded at 44.1, but we did up-res everything for consistency.
For those at home, that means that this was recorded at the same sampling rate that CDs use, which is what we use for VHS, but now that we've gone to DVD, everything's at 48.
Correct. And it was recorded digitally, which is a plus, but at the same time, there is a great deal of effort that goes into the restoration process.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we're fighting is, in the old days, we had a lot of booth presence on the recording, just because we couldn't hear it at the time because the quality of our monitoring equipment has improved tremendously. But the actors sit in a little booth listening to the dialogue over headphones, and quite often in the old days, if you listened really close, once we went back and started listening to it, you could sort of hear ghosting coming in over their headphones.
Yeah, there's some pretty significant headphone bleed. And the entire signal chain is changed immensely. I mean, from the microphone to the preamp to the converter to the actual recording equipment that we're using. So,
And what this does now is it means that if they've moved the positioning of scenes and sound effects around, so whereas it used to be unnoticeable because it was masked by the actual original sound, now you get this stuff that's ever so slightly out of phase with the background, and you've had to go in and manually clean all that stuff up.
well, correct, and plus a lot of the imperfections in the original were masked by the fact that it was a stereo mix, and now the majority of dialogue is present in the center channel without anything to mask it.
Right. Of course, on the other hand, the advantages that we've had with the remix is our ability to place the voices into environments has improved tremendously. I think that's what people really be noticing about the remix, is that there's so many places where everything just blends so naturally, especially with Ava, where you've got a lot of people talking in the background over speakers and then people talking in front of it. In a stereo mix, that can get very confusing to understand. Whereas when you get the sonic separation of something being on just the left channel or on the rear channels, it helps your brain say, okay, that's this line and these are these lines.
Right. I mean, that's essentially the job of a mixing engineer, I mean, in this particular environment. Because, I mean, there really are no environmental factors.
Everybody's in a booth that has absolutely the bottom minimum amount of room reverb. There's a tiny, tiny bit because if you take out too much, everybody sounds like you've got your fingers in your ears.
Right, and it's the job to recreate these ambiences and make them convincing because there is no location.
Plus, of course, on Ava, we've got a lot of electronic processing, people speaking over PAs, as heard through windows, people cutting back and forth in the middle of conversations, from a radio voice to a live person there in front of you, as much live as a cartoon character, of course, can be, and all these really tricky sonic situations because when they were originally doing it, they weren't really paying much attention to where the sound was coming from.
Right, that was actually one of my main choices as sound designer, was to change the way the voices were perceived from inside the Ava. Because the environment needed to be completely and totally removed from any, reference of reality, in my opinion. So it deserved a special treatment, I think.
Yeah, there was stuff we did originally. The interiors of the Avas, we had come up with a womb-like kind of ambience, and there's basic reflective sounds off walls in large areas and that sort of thing, backscatter and so on. But what's been done now really changes everything, and Whereas I think the original Japanese track got away with a lot of what it did because it was so basic. It was just like a radio show going on over the visuals. On the English version, it was more obvious, I think, to a lot of people that the environments weren't necessarily dead on. It wasn't something you knew immediately, but there was a nagging suspicion in the back of your head that this doesn't quite seem to be right for the environment.
The original mix of the Japanese and the English both, I mean, they served their purpose very well at the time, but they were dated compared to audio standards of today, and that's when we received the new Japanese materials. It was just, I mean, it was night and day, the same way the video was.
Yeah, I mean, they literally went completely back and redid huge chunks of the audio work from scratch. It wasn't just, oh, we're going to remix it. No, they took all the original sound effects they had. A lot of them were junked and new effects were put in. The music was re-encoded. I believe some of it was actually re-recorded.
There's different songs, there's different effects, definitely between the two versions.
But it's the music itself is actually a different mix. As you know, there are certain places where in the 5.1 individual instruments are thrown to the rear channels, like in the opening credits. So what's the bongos are coming in on the rear channel?
Yes, well, the rear left channel.
Yeah.
Prominently, a bit too prominently for my taste, but you know, it is there.
It's everyone's taste. Yeah, I think that's more like, hey, look, it's in 5.1 now. You're going to really notice it, kind of sort of thing.
Right. It was apparent, but I mean the overall effect. I think. I mean the show is obviously has a large enough fan base, and a demand to redo these materials. I mean, to actually, it's worthy of that type of treatment, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean the show has continued to involve fans in all the years. It's just amazing that something that we did. This was actually only the second long form, that is to say a TV show of 26 episodes, that we did. We started on Blue Seed shortly before this, and I think we'd done about 4 or 5 episodes of Blue Seed before we started on the first Eva, so we were still kind of learning the process. And there were a lot of things that we did then that I would definitely do differently now. One of the things that, listening to it in retrospect, is that we were recording initially 2 episodes at a time, and the background characters would quite often, end up repeating every 3rd or 4th episode, because originally they released 2 episodes to a tape, and we weren't really thinking, well, 2 episodes down, it's the same guy in the back. Well, we were recording that 3 months after we recorded the previous 2 episodes, and now you go back and listen like, oh, wait a second, you notice the same guy speaking a little bit more, and you've done some stuff to fix that. We've got actually a few cases and replaced people.
That's been actually one of the biggest challenges, was trying to make it not seem redundant, because it is playing 5 episodes at a time. So you're watching them back to back, and there's subtle little tricks like pitch shifting and certain ways of pulling lines from other places that are still maintain the original intent without being redundant. So.
Yeah, we've actually also done there are a few places where our original translations were not exactly as spot on with the final intent. That is, they made sense at the time, but looking back on it afterwards, it was like, wow, I really wish that line had been different. And we've actually had Allison Keith in to record some of the Misato lines over again. Of course, she's also been in to re-record the Coming Attractions, because we have much shorter versions of the Coming Attractions in these versions than what was on the original.
Right, it was 30 seconds, but in the original it was 60.
With entirely different background music, because when we did them originally, we didn't have background music for the previews, so we used what I call the action music, which is very reminiscent of John Barry's 007 theme, the dun, 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 dun thing. And of course everything was done around that, and then of course the actual Japanese music is da, 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 da. It's all happy and people are dying and that sort of thing, and it's kind of, okay. So we really needed to re-record it so it made sense in context.
There's actually several augmentations that are made. There's some significant differences even between the Japanese and English mixes in the vocal effects themselves. I mean, at the risk of sounding stereotypical, this seems to be relatively consistent between Eastern and Western films. I mean, Americans in particular usually prefer things to be slightly larger of scale. These are due to different cultural differences, but the intent always is to maintain the original integrity of the Japanese without changing it too much, but still making it original and unique.
Right, right. Well, I mean, one of the things that's just a basic problem when you're doing an English language version is the fact that Japanese grammar and English grammar are entirely different, and the placement of the words is quite often entirely different as far as what's important and what is important. And because you have to stress things differently,
And the cadence of the language.
the cadence, which is actually one of the things you've really been fighting here, is because what you're literally doing, for the people who don't understand, is we have these tapes, and of course the tapes don't match the running times anymore of the new revised versions because there's slight differences in the lengths of each and every scene. So basically what Wade's been doing is sitting there, rolling these tapes out, cutting each line out individually, and repasting it back into the proper context. While he's doing that, he's also taking advantage of the fact that we have a lot better ability. That was really terrible grammar. A lot better ability now to manipulate the actual dialogue to fit the lips a little better. It's not a horrible squeeze or, something really artificial sounding, but the lip flaps actually don't match anymore.
Well, our preamps, our microphones, preamps, the entire signal chain has gotten so much better that there's a certain level of expectation from a product that we produce.
Yeah, I mean, especially after, you were the mix guy for Rosophon, which was, a show that has a lot of similarities to Evangelion. It's newer, and the sound design on that show is flawless.
It's incredible. Yeah.
And because we went in knowing what we were working with, we were able to get some very, very seamless stuff and do some wonderful bits where characters are talking very low and it's still very legible. When we were recording Eva, quite often the music in the background would be so bad because Japanese cuts so much better than English does. It's a much harsher edged language, for lack of a better way of saying it. We would actually have to have the characters just speaking much louder just to cut over it.
Right, and the placement sometimes doesn't necessarily fit in with what's going on because the Japanese language, as you said, it pierces through music and effects. And honestly, there's some noisy takes on the original English version. So yes, I did spend a lot of time trying to reduce that amount of noise so it's not so perceivable.
Yeah, I was really surprised once I actually sat down and started listening to what you had done with it. It's like, wow, it sounds so much better, not just in terms of the acoustics, but it actually improved the feeling of the performance because they finally all seem to actually be in the same room 100%. I think the actors were always really good about giving the feeling that they're talking to each other, but because they would all be different distances from the microphone as they moved around in the booths, and some of them were actually recorded in different booths at different times, and the system that we were recording on would actually, the mic preamps would be set slightly differently day to day. We couldn't overcome that technically back then with the old audio vision equipment we were using. And now with the new state of the art, it's like, wow.
Well, I mean, that brings up an interesting point as well. The time compression and expansion algorithms that were available at the time made it difficult to make accurate lip sync viable. So it's not worth sacrificing the overall performance just for lip sync, but now.
Right. Well, the biggest thing that we learned back then is you could do a slight bit of compression, maybe like 97%, if the diction was originally very clean. If someone was mumbling or getting a little too close to the mic so you're picking up a lot of the mouth sound and so on, the compression algorithms in the old systems would actually accent that.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the great things about having access to nice gear.
It's just, it's so different. And you came in long after we had actually done Eva. Your first show was actually Gasaraki.
Yeah, it was Gasaraki.
Which was another show that has a lot of similarities to Eva. And at that point, I'm trying to remember, we had, was it just before Gasaraki or was it right after? I think it was just before Gasaraki that we had actually moved away from the audio vision and into...
It was actually right after.
Right after.
Right after. It was right. And, I mean... And we moved. Everything has changed, and in that change, I think that hopefully the quality of the product altogether has just gotten, obviously much better.
Yeah, I mean, from a technical standpoint, things have definitely improved tremendously, and we're really benefiting from that on Ava Platinum. It's really strange sitting here and listening to this something that we did 9 years ago, and it sounds like something we're recording now. And I know the amount of work you're putting in, having to clean up the dialogue, all the lip farts as we call them, and stuff that we used to just leave in there because it really wasn't possible to clean it out. And now you can go in and literally expand the audio out so that the waveforms are all the size of your head, and go in and clip just a tiny section of that waveform where there's that little digital glitch or whatever.
Right. Well, it's mainly just giving this particular project the amount of respect because this is a huge cultural phenomenon. I wasn't actually familiar with it before I started mixing on this project, so I've become more familiar with it, and I've come to learn it as I've mix it, and I've purposely not watched the entire series so it can develop with me. And it really is a cultural phenomenon. It's crazy.
Yeah, but it's at the same time, you understand why it works because there's so much stuff that is dropped that leaves you wondering every episode, all these questions asked, and every time they answer a question, it's answered with more questions.
Well, I remember that was one of my first questions for you. It was like, what are the angels? What is all this? What is all this? And it's like, yeah, that's the point. There's tons of religious symbolism in it, and that's why I think it's become what it was. And honestly, this is...
Yeah, I really think that the reason Ava's been so successful is they didn't answer the questions.
Right.
So people have to keep coming back and coming up with their own. And when they did answer questions, they did it in a way that people didn't care for the answers. And they say, no, that can't be the real answer. I want this. I actually really, really like the way the series ends, not wanting to give away spoilers here. And I think that going on to do the movies was a mistake because I think that they went in a direction that was certainly not in the same spirit as the TV series.
Well, see, that's one of... I mixed the director's cut before this, and so I know the end, and I was like, what the hell is going on?
Right. Mm-hmm. So you've seen the end.
But it's, honestly, this episode, the reason I picked this one is because this angel to me was like the most dangerous one. Mm-hmm. It was,
it's subtle.
Right.
It's ever present. I also really like this episode because this was a great episode for the actors because we learned a little bit about them. It was also, I think, for Sue Ulu, who played Ritsuko. It was a great episode for her because up until this point, Ritsuko had basically been the woman with the clipboard, kind of brusque, and we actually get a little bit more into it. And people who have not met Sue have no idea how big a stretch this character is for her. Everyone thinks, oh, well, that's Sue because that's the first part. And it's like, no, Sue is Turkish, actually. And the voice she uses for Ritsuko is completely unlike the voice she grew up speaking. Her natural speaking voice, she's spoken that way for me a few times, much higher. She had to go through speech therapy to lower her voice so she wouldn't annoy people in this country with a much higher voice register. And to try and drop into the head of this Japanese woman for a Turkish woman, I thought was an interesting challenge, but she rose to it wonderfully.
Well, it is odd because most of the voice actors that participated in this particular project are no longer around.
A lot of them are, actually. It's about 50-50.
50-50? Okay.
Yeah, I mean
obviously
Tiffany,
Allison,
Spike,
Tiffany,
Allison.
Yeah.
Of course, Allison left and came back.
But it is odd mixing and hearing voices and, like, who is that?
Who are these people? And actually, regular in the background characters, and he was just in the other day recording on Parasite Dolls. A lot of these people still come through on occasion. Others have gone on to their own careers outside. Obviously, Amanda Wynn and Jason Lee, now Jackson Lee, are doing work in L.A.
Right.
We actually managed to track down Gil Lundy for the director's cut, and I just got word today that long after we did the director's cut, we just found Kyle Sturdivant again, who was the original Kaworu, which is a part for the director's cut we had to replace with Greg Ayers.
You actually played a part in here, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm actually Hugo, the guy with the glasses. It was actually the last time I played a continuing character.
Right.
I would do bit parts periodically, but the main reason I did that is when we started recording this show, we had not actually built our own studio yet. And this was like the third thing we actually recorded in the first studio we built. And prior to this, we were using an outside studio we had to rent, and we had a big problem with actors not showing up. So when actors didn't show
That's
up,
different from now. How?
you were well. The thing is, back then, because it wasn't our studio, we were already paying for that engineer and for those machines and everything. So every hour we didn't have an actor in the studio was a couple of $100 going down the drain.
Right.
So I had just gotten in the habit of saying, okay, if we have a no-show or a late actor, I'm going to step in the booth and start doing something. So I had gotten in the habit on the early 1 and 2 shot shows, things like Gunsmith Cats and so on, of doing background voices. And on Blue Seed, I gave myself this small continuing character named Sugashita, and I did the same thing on Eva, never realizing that here it would be 9 years later, and I'm still having to go back and revoice this character.
Well, that's the very first thing I thought, because I mean, obviously I didn't know that you were in the show, and I was like, is that Matt? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and under a pseudonym.
I like how they have nerve on all their stuff. It's like on their coffee cups.
Well, of course, it's because they have a lot of nerve. But you can't have too much nerve.
They have nerve parking stickers, nerve coffee cups, nerve paraphernalia.
Yeah, it's built-in instant merchandising, and you know Gynax, you know that they are fairly infamous in Japan for marketing things to an extent no one else has ever touched. It's really quite amazing.
Well, they definitely took some very, very bold chances with this show, but obviously it worked.
And here we go with yet another rendition of the end theme. Every episode has a different version of the end theme.
Some are better than others.
I think everybody in the cast went through it. Some are better than others, yeah.
But, to be completely honest.
It's the reverse. You know, people are always saying, well, geez, how come the American actors, can't say the Japanese names exactly like the Japanese? Well, it's because it's a different phoneme set. And it goes the other way. When you're sitting there trying to sing a song in a language that's not naturally your language, it's one thing to go from French or Spanish to English.
Right.
There's only a few phonemes that aren't, the rolled R's and so on. The guttural H's and so on.
From a Latin base to an Eastern base, it's
right. It's a completely different set, and there's simply sounds that don't exist. I mean, B, as a sound doesn't, and V are the same sound in Japanese. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Attacks and Ikari's responses actually ordained by the Dead Sea Scrolls? Seele, the secret organization that controls both NERV and the Human Instrumentality Project, joins with Ikari to verify the events of both the past and present. Will the answers be revealed?